All right. So I have a friend of mine from Southern Evangelical Seminary. His name is Simon Brace. He is a chapter director at in Ratio Christi, and he lives in South Africa. So I'm going to bring him on and have him introduce himself and share some about the challenges of doing apologetic ministry in South Africa. And as you tune in, if you wouldn't mind just commenting in the chat box where you are watching from. And if you have any questions anytime throughout the talk, don't hesitate to shout it out, and we'll get to it probably near the end. But all right, well, I'm so excited, and let me call Simon right now. Hi, Simon. Welcome.
Well, good evening. It's good to be with you.
How are you doing today? How's South
Uh,
Africa?
we are coming towards the end of winter now, so things where we stay are very dry
Mm-hmm.
and dusty and windy now as we wait for the rains to come.
Mm-hmm.
So we live on a high veld here in Potchefstroom, and we've had a pretty cold winter, and we're waiting for the rain. So no, we're doing well. Very blessed here where we are in the ministry, and God is taking wonderful care of us. And yes, surprisingly busy despite all of the COVID restrictions and everything else. So yes, we are delighted with the place we live and the town we live in, and also the ministry opportunities are really amazing. So yeah, praise God.
Yeah, awesome. So can you share a little bit about how did you get into apologetic ministry and
Mm.
Ratio Christi specifically?
Okay, so my getting into apologetics is kind of tied to my kind of testimony. I became a Christian when I was at school. And I went to school in South Africa in the East Coast in a city called Pietermaritzburg. And I was a teenager when I gave my life to Christ, and I was fairly committed as a Christian at high school. And then when I left high school and went to Technicon, which is kind of like a community college, to go and study land surveying, that's when the wheels kind of fell off the wagon, and I ended up becoming kind of like the prodigal son kind of story, and I walked away from God, although I never really rejected Christianity, and I would do what I think many people do, is kind of pray every now and then. But for the most part, God was on the sidelines, and anyway, I cut a long story short, I came back to the church. I was living in the UK at that stage in London, and very, very fortunate to be tied into some churches where I had some very dear Christian friends who had a tremendous impact on me. And yeah, I came back to the Lord and asked Him to, make good what I had destroyed. And God was
Mm-hmm.
faithful and has continued to be faithful. And yeah, I don't have enough time to share all of the amazing things that He's done in my life. And but one of the most amazing things that happened to me when I was living in London was I had a tremendous zeal for evangelism and sharing the gospel. Of course, living in Europe is a very tough place to sometimes be a Christian and share your faith, because most people in Europe are secular, and so they've usually got some kind of objection to level against the Christian faith. And I wasn't really prepared to answer any objections. I kind of wore my heart on my sleeve, and God changed my life, He can change yours. So join Jesus was the kind of thing. But cutting my teeth on trying to do evangelism in the UK was very tough. And then some friends invited me to Speaker's Corner in London, which is a tough place where there's a lot of public debate. And one of the biggest conversations and dialogues that happens at Speaker's Corner is between the Christians and the Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I was hopelessly ill prepared to deal with the Muslims, and so I got thoroughly owned, if I could use that term, by the Muslims. And that uncomfortable red pill lesson in my interaction with the Muslims was also something that God used to arouse me from my ignorance and slumber over many things. So that was a journey and an appointment in some sense, where the Muslims were in some sense aroused me from my slumbers and pressed me to think a little bit more deeply about the Christian faith and why I believe what I believe. And fortunately for me, as God has always done, He's always had some people in my path, and I was able to befriend some Christians, one of whom would become my wife now. And these Christians were actually making headway and actually, unlike myself, having meaningful conversations with Muslims at Speaker's Corner. And I saw some amazing work there and met some amazing people, and my life was changed. The Christians there were just extraordinary and inspiring and continue to be. So anybody who's in London, go and check out Hyde Park Christian Fellowship. What an amazing group of people.
Did
And
you
so
work?
that,
I was going to ask, did you work alongside Dr. J. Smith at that time?
yes. To a large extent, he was the person who was leading that, and he was just a tremendous disciple maker and mentor. Even if he didn't pick it, he just got stuck with us, and I just learned so much through him, and he had a profound effect on my life, and we still keep in touch. And I've learned so much through him, and so that's really what set me on this course to being introduced to what apologetics is. I didn't really know what apologetics was all about. I was profoundly influenced by the ministry of RZIM and Ravi Zacharias, and so that had a huge impact on me. And so I began to be introduced to what apologetics is, and then I was wanting to go and study theology, and I couldn't get into any programs in the UK. So I looked to the US, and I got accepted at SES, and that's where we met. And SES was just such a special time in my life. I just a place that I have such fond memories of. It's just a beautiful time in my life where I just grew so much in the Lord, and as I studied under people like Dr. Geiser and others, and just built tremendous relationships. And my wife, we met her, I proposed to her there. We got married. We studied together. Nell and I. We started our family there, and SES and the community there was just tremendous. And I was privileged enough to be involved in their missions program.
Yeah, you
And
started TEAM, correct?
that's correct. Well, it wasn't really me. I kind of like was, I was kind of like part of a group of us that were. There was many others who were involved. Prem Isaac was them, and Kyle McManamy, and Mike Jackson, and Kathy and Joya.
Nice.
Many, Bill Roach, John Brannan.
I
so
just
there was
remember you helped with my trips to Brazil. You were very, helpful in connecting me with people. And
so I just happened to be there where they fortunately gave me a job, because I was a student, so I was kind of low on finances. So I was going to take anything that was going to give me some income, even though it was, at that stage it was part-time. So I could continue my studies. And then we built the missions program, and out of that missions program, Ratio Christi was birthed at SES. And so,
very cool.
And it's an amazing story. Unbelievable. And that's where we met, and we've done a lot of work together. Yes.
Yeah, I remember there's someone who used to say, like, God loves you and Simon Brace has a plan for your life or something. Do you remember that?
That came from Prem Isaac, a good friend of mine.
Gotcha.
And, I was always
inspirational.
Very eager. I was always very eager to put people into the deep end and say, "Oh no, you can do this. You can do this talk. Come and join us." And, But no, it was a beautiful time.
Yeah, and it was fun. I got to join you and your family, and Dr. Who was it? John Lennox was there, and John Joroge and some others in 2012. I came, for a week in South
Africa.
That's correct,
You
was
came.
A lot of fun.
We did lots of missions trips all over the world. I went to Europe many times. We came to South Africa many times. We did. We visited. I sent many people to other places I never got to go. So we had teams go to Brazil. We went to Norway. We were in Greece. We sent teams to China. It was Yeah, no, we had a few teams go to China. I never got to
Mm-hmm.
go myself, but I was
Mm.
helping to organize and send teams in to go and do work. And so
Oh, that's
it was an
awesome.
amazing time. And many of the people that I met there, I'm still in touch with now, and many of them
Mm-hmm.
support us. And we're
Mm-hmm.
so grateful for their support because it allows us to do our work. So
Mm-hmm.
that's
For
very
sure.
helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. You all are full-time missionaries in South Africa, right?
Yeah, but
For the
it's
most
kind of
part.
weird because we're not really in a foreign country. We kind of just
Your
came
own
back
country.
home. So yeah, but in some sense, yeah, we're missionaries in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
gotcha.
sort of, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. So, yeah, the topic of today is the challenge of doing apologetic ministry in South Africa. So, what would you say is one of the biggest challenges?
Okay, so um, Africa, I think, and I wouldn't presume to speak on the entire continent. Africa is not a monolithic mass of people. It's Africa has amazing and diversity, and it's a huge continent. I think it's three times the size of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just massive, and so just the differences in languages and people groups and regions where you are, desert, equator, east coast, west coast, North Africa, sub-Sahara Africa. It's just, and of course the history is just also just so it's just amazing. So of course it's very difficult to say, when you're talking about doing ministry in Africa, typically you want to know where and to whom, because even within South Africa, there's a rich diversity. We have 11 official languages in our country. And well, it's not my country. I'm originally from Zimbabwe, but
That's
but
right.
my wife is South African,
Mm-hmm.
and there's just tremendous rich diversity in South Africa. And so to ask what are the specific issues, I would, and I'm focusing on pretty much campus ministry, although I'm interacting a lot with local churches.
Mm-hmm.
Predominantly our work is with students.
In
So
Potchefstroom, correct? That's where
yeah,
your
that's right.
university is. Okay.
That's the town. It's Northwest University, NWU, where we are based,
Mm.
and it's a city or a town about an hour and a half south west of Johannesburg, and so fairly central in the country, and it's kind of like a university town. So yeah, the challenges it is you want to be specific, but I would argue that here in South Africa, the big issues that are facing us as a nation are ultimately, for most people, they're tied back to political and economic issues. South Africa is the country with arguably the greatest disparity that exists between people who have stuff and have money and those
Mm-hmm.
who don't. In
Gotcha.
fact, on many occasions, if ever you hear lectures on disparity and economic disparity, it's
Mm-hmm.
very often images from South Africa
Mm-hmm.
that are taken. Time magazine has these images. And so we are a country that has cities which are very first world. If you fly into them, our cities, we have malls and shopping centers and modern buildings and 4-lane motorways and all that kind of stuff. And then right next door to these high and modern cities, you can have a slum. People living in shacks, people living under corrugated tin or even under just whatever they can use to make a roof, bits of plastic and board or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the challenge of South Africa is it's a country, and it's not unique. Many nations are the same. I mean, you've spent a lot of time in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
You have favelas there, and I've been to Brazil as well. And so there is
That's
also
right.
economic disparity there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a massive challenge. Now, just to double down on top of all of that, which is significant, is we are also a country that has a very, very troubled history, and a history in which it's very difficult to find any period where there isn't some or other kind of really contentious issue going on. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, the history with um, the Europeans arriving in South Africa and South Africa being known for its history of apartheid,
Mm-hmm.
that affects everybody in this country.
Okay.
The way that people speak to each other and how they talk is profoundly influenced by this history.
Mm-hmm.
And we're past the apartheid, but there's still a lot of stuff lingering here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's, on top of that, many other issues. At the moment, the country has been ravaged by corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're not the only country in the world that has corruption. There's many countries that have corruption. And Africa, as a continent, suffers tremendously. Most African countries from corruption, and unfortunately, the corruption is with the political leaders, and this is having a huge impact on society. And so, I would say that to answer your question, the main issues that we tend to be dealing with here are, if you tie it back, usually go back to issues of race, politics, and economics.
Okay.
Those are key issues in the minds of people. At the same time, we have the largest Indian community outside of India in South
Mm-hmm.
Africa. So we are an apologetics um, uh, place for training because we have all the world's major religions here in South Africa. We have a
Mm-hmm.
large Muslim community. We have a large Hindu community. South Africa has New Age people here. We have Christianity with everything that you can find in America. Plus, we have our own African initiated churches and an African brand of Christianity. And so it's a very, very rich, diverse place
Mm-hmm.
to do ministry and deal with people. So it's good if you come over to South Africa to try and meet with people who have got some of that background knowledge, because it is
Mm-hmm.
such a diverse place to do with.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was just checking out your YouTube channel, which I have linked below as well, Ratio Christi in South Africa, and you have videos about everything, like working with cults, religions, yeah, and all
Yeah.
the issues that we deal with here in the U.S. You're also dealing with quite a bit.
Yeah, I would submit to you, we are dealing with just about every issue that
Mm-hmm.
American churches deal with. And then on top of that, we have other stuff. Um, for example, the we deal with the effects of traditional African religion, which has impacted the majority of South Africans. Majority of South Africans are black South
Mm-hmm.
Africans, and they have a rich culture and a rich history, and this impacts them tremendously, and it
Mm-hmm.
affects the way that they think about everything, and particularly when they think about Christianity. So there are so many issues that we have to deal with and think about, which is why it's always important when you're here is to begin by asking lots of questions,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can kind of drill down early on in the conversations with people, because you just can't, you've got to be careful with making assumptions about where people are and what they think and what are their belief systems. And so, and like I said to you, we have all the same apologetic issues that you're confronted with in the US, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, more stuff, which is why our YouTube channel is very diverse. Because I mean, we've been dealing with stuff like Satanism, the New Age, the Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses are here in South Africa. They're in
Mm-hmm.
Potchefstroom. We've engaged with Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. And then on top of those kinds of cults with which Americans are familiar, we have our own African cults.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, these are our made in Africa cults, and we have all
What
kinds
are
of.
what are some of the major ones in South Africa? I know more about Kenya
Um,
and Uganda.
w- yes, well, we have some of the South African cults. There will be one. It's recently changed its name, but there was a cult up in Pretoria called Christ and Me International, um, which looks very much like a modern church. It's white South African church predominantly,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a cult. So one of our Rasha Christi chapter directors has done research on this group, and we've interacted with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so but they're from Pretoria. There's been cults here in South Africa that were birthed out of Korea and led by Koreans. It's and with South Africans following and dedicated to these people. We've had cults within the Black South African groups, and some of those cults have been deadly. There was a cult down in the Eastern Cape where basically the leaders of this cult got into a gunfight with the South African police force, and a lot of people were shot up. So it's not Waco, Texas, and David Koresh, but we have stuff like that over here, and we have a lot of stuff going on in the church that is not biblical and is very unhealthy as well. Because Africa is a place where people are open to spirituality, okay, but of course spirits can be different, and you can see that not all spirits are the Holy Spirit. And so with that means that people are going in all kinds of directions. So, most people in Africa tend to be spiritual. What do I mean by that? Well, they'll have some kind of notion of God, and you can often have a conversation with them about these things without them getting really uncomfortable, which was tended to be my experience. When I was in Europe, you had to navigate that conversation a little bit more carefully.
Gotcha.
Whereas here in Africa, you don't tend to be atheists. Although we have a growing contingent of atheists in South Africa, and people who are subscribing to a very secular, atheistic or agnostic worldview, we have plenty of those here as well. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So, a while back, well, you guys often have debates, right? Christian-Muslim debates. Can you share some about, outreach to Muslims? Like, what part of the country is that more done? Is that more just Durban, or like all over, or?
Yes. So our major cities also tend to have communities where, I suppose, like other countries in the world, where you'll find kind of a large contingent of people who have a shared worldview. So if you go to Durban, which is one of the three major cities in South Africa, the main cities in South Africa are Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban. It's important to also know that Pretoria and Johannesburg has kind of become one massive, metropolitan area, because it's kind of Johannesburg kind of swallowed up Pretoria. So that's the biggest center of South Africa. But if you go to those major cities, which rival in terms of size, particularly Johannesburg, the biggest cities in the world, I think the population of Johannesburg is like 16 million or something,
Wow.
So these are huge cities. Then you can find communities, you can find Muslim communities, and you can find Hindu communities. So there's a large Muslim community in Durban, and there's reasons for that. And of course, historically, also reasons for a large Indian community on the East Coast and in Durban as well. And we have had many engagements with Muslims in those areas. Although in recent years, my wife and I kind of, when we got involved at SES and then also with Christi, our work shifted to a much broader audience of worldviews than specifically ministering to Muslims, which is predominantly what Nell and I were involved in when we were in the UK.
That's actually how I met Nell. You connected me with her in London one time. We went to Speaker's Corner. I don't know if you remember that, but
yes, okay, I remember now. Yes, wow, yeah, that's actually yes. So our work has shifted. So we have had events here in South Africa, Christi debates and discussions with Muslims. I haven't done any formal debates with Muslims, but many of my friends have done formal debates with them. People like John Gilchrist and Rudolf Borshoff. James White has been here in South Africa, and he's debated the Muslims. Jonathan McClatchy has done an excellent job here. So we have had people out here to debate the Muslims, both on the universities and in churches and in mosques.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as Nell and I disciple and mentor young people, we encourage them
Mm-hmm.
to engage Muslims when they meet them in town. There's a large Muslim community here in Potchefstroom.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wouldn't say large, but there's a prominent community here.
Okay. Is
So
Potchefstroom a pretty good sized city? I visited briefly, but I don't remember.
yeah, it's fairly big. I don't know what the population is.
Mm.
The university, well, I suppose prior to COVID, I think has about 16 to 20,000 students on it.
Okay,
I
that
think.
is
Yeah,
decent. Yeah.
yeah. So
Okay.
it's a sizable university. Um,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, I would love to have you and Nell too on sometime to talk about maybe giving some good responses to Muslim objections because I really enjoyed some talks Nell did on I think just topic of Jesus and the
yeah,
Trinity at
yes.
SES as well as women and
No,
apologetics.
it
So you can let her
it
know
was yes, no, it
if
was
she's
something that we
watching.
did a lot. Yeah, no, she's
Hmm.
busy making pizzas for the kids now.
Oh,
It's
okay.
tonight's movie night at
Yeah.
the Brave household, so
Hmm.
she's doing that. But yes, we should do that then. We would have to knock some rust off because we were I suppose it's how God works. You as you as you go on in your life, He puts you in different venues, and you kind of got to um assess where you are and do
Hmm.
what you need to do to prepare you for the people to whom you're ministering.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, given that we're working with university students at the moment, the challenge of that and South African university students, because they all come from such different backgrounds,
Hmm.
is you have so many different things that you're having to deal with. I mean,
Hmm.
you could be speaking to a pretty tough atheist, to atheists who are basically agnostics but don't know the difference between the two, to people who are new ages, to people who are Muslims, and then amongst the Muslim community, different kinds of Muslims, to
Hmm.
people who are still tied to traditional African religion, to
Hmm.
people who are part of African initiated churches. Like, for example, a large contingent of South Africa is tied into this movement called the Zionist movement within South Africa. And it's interesting, it has a
Oh
rich
yeah, that's
history
very interesting.
connecting back to America.
Hmm.
And a large proportion of the population of South Africa are Zionists, whether they come
Forgotten
from
about that.
the Zion Christian Church, the ZCC, or whether they're part of the groups of the Amazioni.
Mm.
And they have campus clubs as well. So you have ZCC clubs,
Mhm.
and conversation with them will be very different. And then on top of that, when you're at university, some students are very political, and so for them, everything's about politics. And
Mhm.
so we have political clubs on campus as well. And here in South Africa, our political um, landscape is a pretty interesting one and
Mhm.
full of all kinds of challenges.
Mm.
Um, and then just to make this really, really, really complex and very challenging, just in the last, I don't know, 3 years, we too have also swallowed the ideas of the social justice scholars and
Mhm.
their wokeology. And so wokeism is alive and well here in South Africa, from discrimination and disparity training in the corporate world.
Mhm.
And you see it in the sports world. South Africa has been, in many instances, has been front and center of the social justice movement. The
Mm.
toppling of statues, for example,
Mm.
began
Mhm.
first in South Africa
Yeah, a
at,
few years ago, right?
at UCT. That's correct, yes,
Mhm.
where students were um, taking down Cecil Rhodes' statue. And of course, back then when that was going on, I had no idea what the social justice movement was.
Mm.
But of
Mhm.
course, it's just grown and into this
Mhm.
monstrous thing. And
Yeah.
I think most Christians are now trying to say, well, what is this? And
Mhm.
how do we respond? And so I spent the last 18 months trying to wrap my head around the social justice movement and
Mhm.
understand the philosophy that drives this movement, because it's
Mhm.
having a profound effect on South African society as it is in many other countries. And
Yes.
for the most part, churches and Christians are ill prepared to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Could you share like what have been the most helpful like philosophical schools to for you in this endeavor, like to try to figure out what's going on? I
Well,
mean,
this is where I'm
reading
grateful.
Marxism.
Yeah,
Go
this
ahead.
is where I'm grateful to SES and taking a degree in philosophy as a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you The way we were trained at SES is to try and look at and begin with the big questions rather than focus on philosophical issues. Is try and think carefully about a person's metaphysics and epistemology. Because if you can drill down into a person's metaphysics, that is what they think reality is, because metaphysics is study of the nature of reality
Mm-hmm.
and how we know something, what is knowledge, epistemology. You can you can once you've drilled down into those foundations, you can pretty much know where things are going to go, because those are the fundamental concepts of a person's philosophy and worldview, and their
Mm-hmm.
conclusions might not be
Gotcha.
consistent, but you can
Mm-hmm.
see where things are. And so for that, I'm very grateful for the training at SCS. Was the philosophical training allowed? It didn't just it gave you real tools to have insight
Mm-hmm.
into how culture works, because everything is driven by ideas, and
Mm-hmm.
philosophy is the discipline which deals with ideas.
Gotcha.
And so the churches, unfortunately, thinks that they can exegete their way out of every problem, and they
Mm-hmm.
can exegete the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there's tremendous emphasis on exegesis and in a lot of seminaries and that, which is very much needed. We need biblical scholars, we need Hebrew scholars and Greek scholars. But unfortunately, the philosophical training for theological students continues to be well below par, which is why I think so many churches are susceptible to something like the social justice movement, because it's a philosophy that's
Mm-hmm.
being sold to you here. And most Christians don't even um, know what philosophy they have,
Mm-hmm.
and completely, or they're anti-philosophy, which is a philosophy itself, and so they're
Mm-hmm.
in this kind of self-defeating position, and or they think that they can somehow just exegete their way out of this mess.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't exegete your way out of the mess with a postmodernist,
Mm-hmm.
because that's just your interpretation. This is what you're going to get. That's just your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
They're just gonna turn around and then just show you how arrogant you are, because you're just so naive. You need to have an education, because if you've had an education, you're going to have read the French existentialists and all this kind of thing. So for me, in the last 18 months or so,
Mm-hmm.
um, I've had to read a lot more stuff with continental and contemporary philosophy,
Oh, okay.
which at SCS we didn't get a lot of that.
Yeah, that wasn't I don't
That
know.
wasn't
I
fun.
went from SES to doing ministry at a university in Nairobi. It's an
Yes,
American international university, originally from California, and everything I was getting there was very like postmodern. And
yes.
I guess I just knew obviously Manuel Kant, Descartes, all of them. They had a huge impact on the
Hmm.
what's the word, trajectory of philosophy. But I had a hard time just like figuring out what in the world these like feminists like or
Yes.
other philosophers were saying, because I hadn't really gotten too much into that. Um,
Hmm.
I was going to do a concentration philosophy until I had to do an online metaphysics class and kind of gave up at that point, but probably
Yes.
should get back into it.
No, you should. You should go and do it. But look, and as so, and I've been paying attention to what SES is doing now. They're changing gears now, and they've added
Yes, I've seen.
classes that weren't offered when I were there, because they're trying to keep up with where the culture is. And so, for
Hmm.
example, they're offering classes in continental philosophy, which I'm wanting to sit in on those classes, because that's the philosophy which is driving the social justice movement.
Oh, okay,
Now,
gotcha.
the advantages is that with philosophy is that there's kind of big philosophers, and then there's the giants of philosophy, and then there's other philosophers. And so, what's very helpful is to know who those are. And
Mm-hmm.
in the modern and contemporary scene, I think that you can tie a lot of the issues back to German idealism,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the thought and the ideas of Immanuel Kant.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew that that was foundational. He's a watershed kind of thinker.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the question is, okay, so you see this thing in society, you know it's driven by ideas. So which ideas are then? So then it was trying to work back from the ideas you were hearing and going, why would you think that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, this person said this and this and this, and I'm going, okay, well, that's interesting, but I want to drill a bit deeper now. I want to know where that idea comes from. And so the last 18 months I've been trying to track back from what contemporary social justice scholars are saying and go
Mm-hmm.
back, well, where did this idea come from? And of course, as you do that, you end up at Karl Marx. Now, he's somebody that I haven't studied, but I'm having to study him. And to be honest with you,
Mm-hmm.
someday I should have studied, because the ideas of Karl Marx have shaped every continent.
Yeah, I think about Brazil. I mean, that's being taught, has been
I
taught
mean,
there forever,
just
and
think
I
about
still
my own
haven't.
country, Zimbabwe. I mean, Robert Mugabe and was trained under the communists, and the way that Zimbabwe has been run in a totalitarian, authoritarian way. And Mugabe's the guys who used to do all Mugabe's dirty work are now running the show in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe is a disaster zone.
Mm.
I've got good friends there, and and so and to a large extent, it's because of the ideas that Mugabe had and how he executed them, and those ideas remain in the hearts and minds of the people leading Zimbabwe at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so South Africa too, and if you look at our political landscape,
Mm-hmm.
we have many political leaders who are still very much enamored and infatuated with the ideas of Karl Marx.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have to study him. It's imperative for me to study Marx, because he's not just philosophy. He's bringing to the table a lot of other things as well. He's got an economic theory that comes with everything else, and and of course, people after Marx then took Marxism and expanded it into all different other areas, and this is where you have the development of kind of neo-Marxism and it's branching into the different areas from the kind of old school Marx to this modern version of Marxism. And that's what we see that's what we see, for example, in the Frankfurt School. If you listen to the people and leading up to that, with people like Lukács and Gramsci and these guys.
Mm-hmm.
But the social justice warriors, although they don't talk a lot about Marx, they're all Marxists, that's for sure. I mean, they, once you begin to see the connections. Now, I must confess to you, I'm just going to be honest with you right now.
Mm-hmm.
To the best of my knowledge, there isn't a single Christian organization that I'm aware of that is doing the kind of work that needs to be done to address this philosophy which has gripped Western civilization. And here in Africa as well. It's had a profound... Robin DiAngelo, they've been here. Peggy McIntosh, they've been to South Africa. Alison Bailey, they've been at our universities. They're rock stars. That they've got their books. And South Africa is a country that could... If there's a country that could really embrace something like critical race theory with our history, South Africa is probably more poised to embrace that than any other country, I would argue, because we're so primed in some way for these philosophies. And so Christians in South Africa have to start paying attention to these issues and these ideas, and we have to develop a response to them. But as I said to you, I'll just be very frank to people now. The place that I've gone to help expedite my knowledge on these ideas, to find out who the key thinkers are, has been the New Discourses site, which was started by Michael O'Fallon, who's a man I would like to meet and think a tremendous amount of, for having the foresight to do this. But interestingly enough,
is he a professor in some university?
No, he's not. He's a businessman. Yeah, he did this interview with James Lindsay.
That's who I'm thinking of. Okay.
Yeah, some building in some America, and when I heard James Lindsay for the first time, I'm like, okay, so this guy's got his finger on this thing. He kind of, and I just kept listening to more and more. Now there've been others who have helped tremendously now that I've learned. Helen Pluckrose, for example's lectures were just very helpful for understanding a lot of things. I really appreciate the work that she's done.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been many others who I recently read Douglas Murray's work called The Madness of Crowds. So these two books by Lindsay and Pluckrose, Cynical Theories, and Douglas Murray's Madness of Crowds, have been very helpful to understand. I've also been reading before that people like Roger Scruton and others, and these aren't Christians.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm hard pressed to find Christians who are giving a robust kind of academic response to this material. I just found it difficult to find it. The responses that have been given are where we need to start with people, and we've seen this with certain people like Vodi Bakum, for example, and Neil Shenby from Russia. Christi's done a good job, I think, of showing where there might be a problem with some of these things. But I'm looking for something a little bit beyond that, not because I enjoy getting to the depths of it, but what I've learned over the years is you've got to go deep into this stuff in order to distill out of that something meaningful to help the church.
Gotcha.
You need to. Now that's not for everybody, but for those of us who are apologists and teaching in the church and training people, we need to be familiar with the ideas that has gripped the social justice movement.
Yeah.
And
so, go ahead.
And the political ideas as well. There's a lot going on here as well. So
yeah, for sure.
That's been a challenge for me, is I'm having to kind of do a lot of studying and reading to form my thoughts on these issues, and then when I bump into people, to ask questions and to challenge certain things if I think it's a really bad idea. And there's plenty of those running around now. So you often find me saying, no, I don't think it's a good idea, and here's the reason why.
Okay. So I have a question here. Welcome, Matt Graham. I don't know if you can see it, Simon. Do you have a bibliography of books for in-depth study on CRT, critical race theory, and Frankfurt School?
I don't have a bibliography because
you have a lot of great articles and videos that you've been sharing to me through WhatsApp, but maybe you should come up with one.
Yeah, so and it's good to have Matt. It's great to hear from Matt. But Matt should know me better than that. He's speaking to Simon Brace. I'm not exactly the most organized person. But I can say this. I've been listening intently to the lectures of these people, and then when they make a mention of a book, then I kind of like, okay, I got to read that one, and then I have in my head a kind of priority list. So I can tell you, I wanted to read Cynical Theories, having listened to Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay. And then I listened to some of Douglas Murray's stuff, and he was an interesting guy. And so then I thought, well, let me just I read The Madness of Crowds, which is very helpful. Since this has to do with sexuality as well, I had to throw Ryan Anderson's work, When Harry Became Sally, in there, because one of the things we're dealing with here all the time in the church is the question of gender, which is tied to this thing as well. Of course, when you start diving into that and the question of sexuality, then when it comes to social justice movement, then the key person is Judith Butler. So now I've got to try and read her work, Gender Trouble, because that's a key text on that. Aside from that, I've read certain articles, like Kimberly Crenshaw's Mapping the Margins, I think it's the name of the paper, because that was a landmark paper. But I'm trying to go back a little bit now, because I don't want to get ahead of myself. So now I've put the car in reverse now. I thought, well, let me slow down with this stuff. So I'm wanting to try and back things up into the Frankfurt School and also back to Marx. I don't know a lot about Karl Marx. So I want to try and have a better handle on Karl Marx and some of his ties to German idealism and that. And then from Karl Marx, follow it via Gramsci, Lukács, and then onto Herbert Marcuse, who, as I'm reading him stuff now, I read a paper by his, Repressive Tolerance, and then James Lindsay's actually reading a paper where he goes through it and he comments on it, and you can just sit and listen. That's been very helpful. I wish Christians were doing that. To be honest with you, I wish they were taking these key papers that were written and saying to them, this you need to pay attention to this, because in this paper we find the strategy, we find the core ideas. The notion of this kind of strange sexuality, which everybody now just has to accept and approve of and endorse. And you can see definitely in Marcuse, some of Marcuse's stuff, man, because he talks about this androgynous society. Now, when I first heard the word androgynous, I was like, what does that even mean? And so fortunately with internet now, you can go on and go, wow, that certainly seems to be what we're pushing for now, is blurring the distinctions between these now as well. The difficulty, though, is now this thing is actually so complex because there's a number of aspects of it that I'm interested in. The sexual. These are the things that are of interest to me. Political theory, which I've begun to take an interest in. Economic theory, because there's always the capitalists are hated by these people. There's the gender issue. There's also the issue of family. I had no idea. Remember when BLM came out and they were opposed to the nuclear family? Mm-hmm. Well, of course, I thought, well, why would you be opposed to the nuclear family? Like, I mean, you might have all these other ideas, but why would you be anti-family? And then as you begin to go back and look at it, you realize, going back down to Marx, and then later on you see other people who are also going after the family. This goes back to Marcuse. This goes back to the Frankfurt School, and then you see it then being cashed out in other feminist thinkers as well, because then the feminist movement becomes a part of this conversation, and you got to go back to the second wave feminists, and then they've all been thrown to the curb now because they're all TERFs, and Germaine Greer and these people, and then you come across somebody like Sophie Lewis who's talking about the abolition of family, and then she gets her stuff from Shulamith Firestone, and I think Shulamith Firestone was a student of Herbert Marcuse, and then you've got the black feminists and Angela Davis. It's
a lot.
It's a lot, So
that's why you can't put a bibliography together. That's a lot. Matt's comment. Simon Brace can rip a horse apart with his bare hands, but it's difficulty putting together bibliography.
Yeah. I'm not good at putting together that kind of stuff. But look,
yeah, that's awesome. I typed some names that I.
Yeah, no, I could certainly off the top of my head mention a few books. The two books that I'm aiming at now is I'm wanting to read Marcuse's work, Eros and Civilization. And I'm wanting to, because this issue, we have to deal with this issue in the church so often, I'm wanting to read Judith Butler's work. And part of the reason why I'm also wanting to read this stuff is I'm actually involved in some other things here in South Africa, apart from Ratio Christi, which is helping some Christian organizations push back against some of the bills that are being pushed in South Africa.
Like the Papuda bill or something?
That you've got the Papuda bill here in South Africa. We've got things like Comprehensive Sexuality Education Program, which is a new education program which the South African government was going to run out here, which had been drafted. The curriculum was put together by UNESCO and funded by USAID. I'm not sure any South Africans were. But when a new curriculum arrives in South Africa and it says that sex is a social construct, I'm going, whoa. And which South African, which South African bureaucrat who's in charge of education believes that or thinks that that's true? I'm not convinced that they're any. I think a lot of them have got these ideas because they're driven by what's going on in our universities and particularly universities like UCT that are very woke. And basically, we have activists in this country who are smart and know how to push bills and drive things politically, and they're just driving the same agenda here in South Africa. And so we've got Christian organizations like Cause for Justice and 4SA, and so we have a team of people who are kind of consulting with each other, trying to talk about these things, because we're facing these issues as well. There's a new bring proposal to get a new bill on the table for the banning of conversion therapy. Well, what do you mean by conversion therapy? Like, is praying for somebody who's struggling with their gender, is that a kind of conversion therapy? Would it be illegal to pray for? Would a Christian counselor who's helping somebody who's struggling with gender dysphoria be guilty of some crime in the future? I mean, and look, that seems crazy, but I mean, there's crazier things happening in other parts of the world, in Canada, in Europe, and with what they're doing to kids there, and puberty blockers and all this stuff, and yeah, it's kind of, and we have that here in South Africa as well. It's coming. We kind of, the advantage of being in South Africa is we kind of follow after these other nations. So whatever craziness births out of Europe, where it often originates, I think it's because that's where the philosophy is from. It then spills over into America and Canada. And then sooner or later, within a year or two, you'll see those same issues here.
That's similar to Brazil. It's
the same arguments and the same issues. And when you actually press people who are committed to them, they quote the same people and the same arguments. Whether it's dealing with the issues of abortion, gender, views on family, views on sexuality, views on hierarchy and authority, it's often just the same old stuff. So there's nothing new under the sun then. You just got to just scratch deeply enough and you say, oh, this is the same thing again. So, yeah. But I'll tell you what, since Matt Graham is on this, since he is an organized guy, and he actually knows how to use a spreadsheet, maybe Matt and I could help put together a bibliography.
Yeah, and Matt, he could definitely name lots of different, like, feminists. I know that's one topic we've talked about discussing on the channel.
Yes.
And all of that's like interconnected, and yeah, it's really interesting. So
Yes,
I was first exposed to critical theory ideas when I went to Kenya in 2011. But I didn't know at the time, obviously, it was that. But it was just very confusing. I took a course called Epistemology and Gender. And yeah, now I'm just seeing like how, like, it's been around for a while, but it's just it's becoming more mainstream, all those ideas.
Yeah.
And
so my first bump up to it, if I think back now, because I think, when did I first bump into this thing? And I remember being at UCT and then also at Rhodes University in South Africa, and we're speaking to students, and the students were talking about how maths is oppressive. And I was like, what?
Math?
And science is oppressive, because a big issue in South Africa is decolonization. Okay. Now, again, the bibliography. Another guy that I have to reread is Frans Fanon. Frans Fanon is read by a lot of South Africans, maybe. And he's an important person in the history of the social justice movement, although he's not referred to a lot. But his work, particularly in the area of colonialism and decolonization, Frans Fanon's book "Wretched of the Earth" is also high up on my list of books that I have to read. I think that I lost my train of thought now. But
Sorry.
But what were we talking about there, Esther? I've lost my train of thought.
I was just kind of commenting as far as like when I first encountered critical theory.
And these students were saying this, and I'm thinking, why would students conclude this? And then I realized, no, this isn't the conclusion of the students. These are students who've gone to university, and because they're at university, they think they're real smart. But they're not really that smart, because the ideas that they're recycling here are just the ideas of the social justice movement. That logic and reason and apologetics. These are the master's tools for oppressing people. And that was 2 or 3 years ago. So what I was bumping up against then was the social justice. I just wasn't aware of what was going on in many of the social science departments in South Africa, to the extent that I'm much more careful of paying attention to what the students are reading there. So, Robin DiAngelo has been to University of Pretoria, I believe, and she just got a massive crowd with her book.
Yeah, that's what Matt was asking about.
Yeah.
So there's not much resistance. I think earlier, maybe before Matt got on, he said there wasn't. Any
No,
organization doing anything?
unfortunately, yeah, it's a real fight here in South Africa because we don't have the privilege of having a lot of organizations like the Heritage Foundation and ADF and these legal team of 3,000 Christians who do pro bono work for and are selective about what they do and I mean, we're much smaller than America, but we don't have a lot, so there's not a lot of pushback from this stuff as well.
Okay.
And unfortunately, when you do get the pushback in the church, the people who are pushing back, whilst I would agree that we need to push back, are often don't understand the issues, they don't understand the ideas, and their responses are bad. They make bad arguments against these positions. And
because they just like create straw men. They don't really understand, I guess,
yes,
where they're coming from. Or
well, as you know, Christians are often some of the most feeble thinkers in society, and ironically, part of that is because we abandoned philosophy in our theological institutions, and we abandoned classes like logic. We actually offer, Christi, we teach our students logic every week. We have 3 logic classes a week, taught by students to students, because it's one of the most important classes. The university say we teach you critical thinking. No, they don't. Go and find a logic class at a modern university if you can. And of course, in the social science department, they dare not teach logic, because if you're to teach logic, then you end up teaching people what a self-defeating statement is. And since so much of the philosophy in the social science departments is self-defeating, you wouldn't then want to arm thousands of students with this tool for saying, hang on, Mr. Professor, you've just guilty of self-stultification. And not once, pretty much every lecture you're guilty of it. So I'm all for Christians all teaching and learning logic and learning to understand arguments, and the difference between good arguments and bad arguments, between formal and informal fallacies, and how to spot a lot of this bad stuff coming out of the mouths of academic people that is self-defeating. I mean, the social justice movement is a philosophy that's just, it's fantastically thick with all kinds of incoherent, self-defeating ideas, in part because it basically is revived postmodernism and added its own thing on top of it. And so, but a lot of people aren't able to respond to it because they're just so philosophically weak, and so they cave into it. And of course, what's smart about social justice movement is they don't tend to traffic in vigorous argumentation. They tend to plow people's emotions,
Yeah, that's so true.
and pander to people's emotions and feelings. We did a lecture last night. Dr. Louise Mabille did a lecture for this on last night, and we have a few people in South Africa that are very capable. Dr. Louise Mabille being one of them. She has 2 PhDs, and she talked about the influence of the Romantic movement on the social justice movement, and its impact everywhere. Everybody is, how do you feel about things, and not the question, well, is this true? Does this idea correspond to reality? Well, as you and I know, to ask the question, is this idea true, is despised nowadays to say something like that.
Yeah.
Because who are you to say that you have the truth?
Yeah. I remember in 2011 when I audited a lot of philosophy courses in Kenya.
Yeah.
I was so annoyed because I would sit in all these philosophy courses. I'm like, none of this is like even a philosophical discussion. It was always like, I don't know, a psychological, it was more about psychology or politics or I feel this way or but that's just my opinion. It was just very and I think it is because everyone has just bought into and they've just been taught this postmodern philosophy, which doesn't care about reality because of the Kantian influence that we can't get to reality, right? So I was like, well, what's the point? Sometimes,
of course,
it's just frustrating
it doesn't
to even
care about
try to figure
reality.
it out.
Yeah, it doesn't care about reality when it's convenient. It cares about it a lot when there's somebody who stands across the table and says, no, I disagree with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. Everybody's entitled to their own perspective, except for those perspectives which I disagree with.
Mm.
Um, this is the. I mean, and this is how this. And you think, when you've taught students logic, and they see how foolish this philosophy is, and yet the vast majority of students coming out of high school in South Africa are just eating this stuff up. Yeah,
Mm.
the vast majority of South African students are moral relativists, and
Mm.
that cuts across ethnic backgrounds.
Okay,
And
gotcha.
yeah, it's interesting how deep this philosophy has impacted South African culture
Mm.
across the cultural lines, where you think, gee whiz, these people have kind of been isolated from these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not true. The
Mm-hmm.
political correctness is here. The the um, the moral relativism
Mm-hmm.
is very much here. Um, and then on the issue of sexuality, it's not nearly as bad as other countries, but it's
Mm-hmm.
coming quickly. It's certainly coming very, very quickly. South Africa is probably the most liberal nation in the African continent, I would argue, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of it's the most progressive and most woke nation. If you compare it to other nations to the north of South Africa, I would argue. And in part, I think that's because in 1990s, South Africa, after apartheid, had to put together a new constitution.
Mm.
And our constitution, whilst having some good things about it, is very liberal and is very much like the Canadian Constitution. So it's no surprise that when you see things happening in Canada, to me, I think that sure sooner or later they will show up here in South Africa because our Constitution, unfortunately, has some aspects of it which I think are, to use the social justice warriors terms, problematic. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so there's work to be done here for the church in South Africa. Tremendous work that needs to be done, and we need help. And the help we need is predominantly from God. We're going to need His mercy and His grace here.
Mm.
Africa is in an interesting situation because the church is growing in Africa. Remember, historically, it's the African Anglicans that have kind of stood up for the Anglican Church and kind of ruined the party for the American Episcopalians.
Hmm.
I've got friends
Also,
of I've got friends of mine who are Anglicans in the U.S. I think they sit under African bishops now. And then 2 or 3 years ago, when the Methodists had their big global event, it was the African pastors who kind of ruined the progressives party within the Methodist church movement. So the
mm.
church in Africa has got a lot of good things going for it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's under attack from every side,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly being attacked from within through philosophies like the social justice philosophy, and through theological liberalism. I've
Mm.
been fighting that a lot here in South Africa within the theological faculties at some of the theological faculties at our major universities. Yeah, that's been around for a few decades, but it's here. And then all the other things on the table. So there's a massive battle here in Africa for the church. I mean, just as you know, not so much here in South Africa, but to the north in countries like Nigeria and even up in Kenya, where you have these nations bridging onto or bordering on Islamic nations, there are some really seriously challenging scenarios there for the Christian communities to live and follow Christ
Yeah.
adjacent to some pretty hardcore
Mm-hmm.
Muslim
I bet
communities. Yeah,
Nigeria is rough, northern Nigeria. Guess it's hard to really know what's going on because it's like rural areas, and I'm
yeah,
not sure how. I mean, I don't think the Nigerian government is really open about what's going on. I don't know.
yeah. Well, even
I
in
talked
South
to my
Africa, I
Nigerian
mean,
friends, and they're like, I don't know, or
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you're getting any of this in the news in America, but we have ISIS in Mozambique now, in northern
Yes.
Mozambique.
I mean, I don't hear about that on TV in the US, but we do have missionaries that have served there. I know lots of Brazilians that
Yeah,
are there and have been there. So sad.
And Mozambique's adjacent to South Africa. There's 4 countries to the north of South Africa. Mozambique is on the east coast, and they've got up. It's in northern Mozambique, so it's a fair distance from our borders. But yeah, there are tremendous challenges here, but of course, tremendous opportunities as well for the church to do its work. And the one, Africa's got so many problems. The needs are just, they're overwhelming. It'll just run you into a state of paralysis. When Nell and I first arrived back here, we were kind of in a state of paralysis because where do you begin? Like, who do you start helping? How do you do that? And it's overwhelming. And so,
Gotcha.
but what you've got to do is you've got to stop, and you've got to say, look, I'm not here to save the world. That's Jesus's job. I'm just
Amen.
one person in the kingdom of God, trying to make a difference where I am. So let me just focus on, and if every Christian in South Africa could try and focus on making a difference in the few people in your life, in whatever way you can, through kindness, through friendship, through love, generosity, charity, practically, blanket here, food here, helping out in whatever way you can, through education, helping educate kids, whatever it is that you can do, whatever skill you have, you could have a massive change. But unfortunately, in South Africa, people are also very cynical. They're very apathetic. A lot of South Africans think that we're the worst country in the world because we've got the worst problems in the world, and we have some serious problems here. Well, I mean, look, to make this personal, we have serious problems here. We have one of the highest murder rates in the world.
Wow.
Theft here is crazy in South Africa. Our security systems, we live behind walls and palisade fences and alarm systems, and we've got private security firms, and it's dangerous. Some parts of South Africa, and some communities, when it gets night, you don't want to be out there. It's dangerous. We have a violent community. Most recently, you saw in South Africa on the East Coast, predominantly on the East Coast, the massive looting and rioting.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, over 300 people died because of that. And so in the midst of a pandemic, South Africans are burning their country to the ground. It's kind of not a good, it's kind of an indictment against South Africa. No, that's not all South Africans. There's many South Africans that are opposed to that kind of thing. But there's issues here. There's a lot of issues, and there's just so much work to be done. And so you've got to really believe Jesus, because there ain't no solution here that's going to make the kind of difference that there needs to be a fundamental change in the individual's heart in terms of their foundational ethic and what is good and true and beautiful. And I don't know of any philosophy that can fix that. And I'm not aware of any UN program that can fix that. And I don't think the United States is going to fix that, or Europe's going to fix that. And why should we listen to them anyway? Who are you to look down your nose as us and tell us how we should raise our children or be a family? I mean, this is what really gets me irritated, is how it is that these people from these countries come and tell us what to do. It's just like, why don't you go back to where you came from and be quiet? Africans we've got our problems, but I can't think of any part of the world where there aren't issues and different varieties of problems. We have problems. We have got potholes. We have unemployment. We have all kinds of issues. But hey, in Canada, you probably don't have potholes, and they probably don't have the problems that they have in Africa. But they've got some laws over there about what you can say to people and how you can speak, and that's a different kind of problem. And maybe I prefer pothole over those kinds of problems.
Sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
No, just for example, you see laws being passed with respect to speech, for example, freedom of speech in Canada. And this is what
Okay.
made
Oh.
Jordan Peterson so famous. Well, what do you want? Do you want a pothole, or do you want laws like that? Well, maybe I'm taking a pothole. You know, but it's coming here fast to South Africa as well. So we got to see how this pans out then. And you know, you're seeing in Europe as well, for example, in some of the Scandinavian countries where they kind of are doing all of this stuff on children and hitting them with puberty blockers and chemically castrating boys. And like, we haven't started that here in South Africa, thankfully, but hopefully we don't get there. I mean, how it is that, at least in South Africa, I had an interesting conversation, Esther. This kind of give you some perspective. So we sometimes have a lot of foreign students coming to the university because they do postgraduate research and kind of stuff like that. So every now and then, because some of our students have got advanced degrees, they interact with these international students, and they end up at Ratio Christi meetings, and we end up, you know, talking to them and sharing the gospel and that kind of thing. And so we've had all kinds of students from Europe over here. And a couple of years ago, well, it wasn't a couple of years ago, I think it was last year, because he was stuck. I think he was a student from Belgium.
Okay.
Was stuck here. He was stuck here because of COVID, but anyway, he managed to get back eventually. But he was stuck because of the COVID thing, and so he ended up in our lounge. And so it was a friend of mine, and Nell and I having a conversation with this guy. And so I'm asking him about Europe, you know, and basically he said, well, he has problems with fundamentalism. So I asked him a question. I said to him, so what do you understand by fundamentalism? Well, for him, fundamentalism was associated with people who, you know, were still hung up about abortion, and people who had issues with homosexual marriage.
Wow.
And so I said to him, if you have a problem with if that's what fundamentalism is, then what are you doing on the continent of Africa? Because the entire continent, for the most part, are fundamentalists. The vast majority of African people and black women know exactly what an abortion is, and they don't want it. Okay, whatever the scenario is, you know, give me the bad scenarios. Yeah, a black woman here know what that is. They know it's the taking of a life. And when it comes to the issues of homosexuality, African people, for the most part, do not think that homosexual unions are normative. Well, who are you to say what's normal? Well, we're African, and we think that anatomy and physiology are important. You know, we're not naive to those things, you know. And so it's interesting to see these European students coming here, and they kind of they all I don't know, maybe they're feeling. It's interesting when you talk to them, because they love being here. Everybody likes to come to Africa because it's so exotic and dangerous, and you know, it's wild out there. You got black mambas, and you know, elephant will step on your car if you're not careful. If you're up in the Kruger, not that ever happens. It happens in the Kruger. Like, watch out for the elephants in the Kruger and a few other parks as well. I have had a few. No, that really does happen. So that's no joke.
Okay, yeah. The Kruger, I'll remember that.
Yeah, and there's not just elephants. Watch out for the rhinos as well, because I had a bad run-in with a rhino with Don Deal with his family. Yeah, we got charged by a rhino. So the animals here are not to be messed with. Okay, in the Kruger National Park, when it says "Don't get out of your car," that sign really means what it says. Don't get out of your car, because something's gonna eat you or trample you into the ground. Anyway, back to what we're saying then is they love to come to Africa and everybody wants to help us, but then you kind of think to yourself, gosh, are you still looking down your noses at us? You know, as African here, we don't understand anything, so we're going to have to be lectured to by these Europeans. And I think that Africans are wising up to this stuff, and they begin to ask themselves, hang on a sec.
And that, okay.
You know, they ask themselves, hang on a sec, what is this idea? Yeah. I'm not convinced of this. I mean, you know, we think it's a good idea that when a child is exhibiting this kind of behavior at the age of 3 and 4 that you should start preparing them to eventually be chemically castrated. Really? You think Africans are going to swallow that? I'm not so convinced.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, if you look at how the social justice movement and some of these ideas can change a culture,
Mm-hmm.
man, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe we
Mm-hmm.
all in Africa just cave over to these things. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I had a question here. I think Richard just joining us earlier. You
Yeah.
mentioned several have been those sides. Kimberly Crenshaw. Do you know who specifically, or you said D'Angelo has
Yes,
been to South
absolutely.
Africa?
Kimberly Crenshaw, Alison Bailey,
Mm-hmm.
Ibrahim Exkini. In fact, at Northwest University, within the last 2 months, they actually had a lecture on, singing the praises of Ibrahim Exkini and the impact of his work here at
Oh,
Northwest
okay.
University.
Oh, wow.
So,
Did you all
yeah,
go then and interact with them at all? Or?
no, but you could watch it online
Oh, yeah.
because it's
Everything's
an
online
online
these
thing.
days. Okay.
So it's an online thing. So but they're reading these works and following them and are impacted by them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but like I said to you, you got to be careful because we've spoken a lot about the social justice movement here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's an issue here, but at the same time in South Africa, there's so many other issues you're dealing with as well.
Mm-hmm.
I,
Yeah,
I don't
so
want
true.
I don't want anybody listening in or thinking to say this. You're just banging the social justice drum now
Yeah.
because
I didn't actually didn't know. I mean, I knew we'd discuss this, but I also wondered, like, okay, you are in the middle of your symposium, right?
yes,
So I've seen, I guess, like bits and pieces of, yeah, like today I was just watching part of, let me see, what is his name? Um, Dr. Mugambi from Kenya.
yes,
Yeah,
that's
and I'm
correct.
really interested to finish hearing that. And I think he's a teacher at a PAC university, which is very close to the university I was at. It's actually walking
Mhm.
distance from the university I was
Yeah,
at. And we would often go there because we couldn't have big Christian meetings at the university I was at because it's very secular. So we would go to Pan African Christian.
yeah,
So yeah, like his talk was on the case for Christianity as an African religion. I think that
yes,
is a very interesting topic, one that I know a lot of my subscribers are
yes.
interested in. Like, the whole idea that Christianity is a white man's religion is something
Hmm.
I heard for the first time in Kenya. But of
Yes.
course, here it's growing too. In the African American community, it's something that a lot of people are hearing, and a lot of the cults in the urban areas, like that's something that they also
Well, this
are
is.
responding to.
I'll give you a retort that I've heard many occasions when we've been doing evangelism on our campuses.
Hmm.
Uh, Black students will come to you and say, "White people came to Africa, um, and they gave us the Bible and took our land."
Yeah, that's very common saying in Kenya for sure.
Mhm.
Like, yeah,
And so
while we had our eyes closed and praying, like they came and stole our land or something.
exactly. So and of course, as a part of that as well, you've got Africa's been profoundly affected by the ideas of Karl Marx.
Hmm.
I mean, a lot of political leaders in South Africa are, and they're not even kind. I mean, some of the leaders of, for example, the EFF movement, they're kind of old school communists. They're recommended reading. They actually, Matt Graham's going to laugh. They've got a bibliography. They're
Hmm.
reading Lenin and they're reading um, old school communism. They're still trafficking in that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
and so that factors into a lot of issues here as well. So yeah, you've got to definitely deal with these issues, and of course the colonialism issue is a very prominent part of the social justice discourse. But prior to the social justice warriors making that their big thing, it's always been an issue, as has race been an issue, and so many of these other vices that ail human beings.
Hmm.
It's just that the social justice warriors have kind of appropriated some of these conversations and put themselves at the center and turned the spotlights on themselves and all, and everybody's listening to them
Hmm.
when actually there's far more interesting and compelling people to read. And when you realize that a lot of the social justice warriors, certainly what I'm discovering is some of their stuff is pretty unoriginal,
Hmm.
and really, if you want to really read more interesting stuff, you've actually, ironically, got to go back and read the white European men like Marcuse and Gramsci and Lukács, and that's the irony of this whole thing, is that this philosophy which thinks that white European men are the worst thing around is built upon the shoulders of white European men. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I haven't read much of them at all.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. So I was speaking to some students on campus here, doing some evangelism. We had an outreach day on campus. We have these days where you can have a table, and there are all kinds of campus organizations, from religious ones to, you know, the wine club, the climbing club. And then there were the political parties, student political parties as well. So you had the ANC there, the Democratic Alliance, and the EFF. And so I went up to these political students, and I started asking them about their political ideas. And this was a fascinating conversation. You know, a lot of the EFF members will wear, for example, red clothing, and it's very stands out from a mile, so you can see them coming over the hill, because it's a very, you know, but it's the same red that you see on with socialist communist movement. It's a communist red. But then, to make things even more interesting, a lot of them wear berets. Okay, so my first question to some of the EFF students was, what do you understand by decolonization? And what are you after in terms of ideas? What are the big ideas that we need? We want to return to an African philosophy and an African view of things, which, of course, I'm interested in knowing what that question is going to go to, because I'm interested in, ultimately, there's going to be discussion on ethics. And usually when there's a discussion on ethics, I can find a bridge to then talk about Jesus and the gospel and morality. As I can on economics. I'm learning now as well that Jesus had a view on economics. And Jesus had,
the Bible does talk about money a lot.
Yeah, Jesus would have something to say to both Karl Marx and Adam Smith.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not just,
he wasn't a capitalist necessarily.
Yeah. So no, exactly. There would be something that Jesus would say to both of those people, and I'm learning this stuff now, and it's important. So, but the first thing I did was, because you've got a bunch of people standing in front of you wearing berets, I said to him, well, if we're all about Africa, then what are you doing wearing a Frenchman's hat?
Okay.
Because if we're about being African, why not wear African garb to promote the African way of seeing things? I said to him, but you're wearing communist red, and communism is a European idea. Communism came from Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a European. I says, everything about you is actually European. You're wearing a Frenchman's hat, and you're trafficking in a European philosophy called communism. I said, what do you have to offer that's African here? Because it's going to be difficult for you to try and persuade me, now that I'm learning about the rich economic trade of Africa, that it squares with communist economics. I don't see it. And I think that, so I think it is a lot that's true about Christianity in terms of its view of the individual and community, that's actually got a lot in common with African culture.
Yeah, that's true. That's what Kevin Murithi was saying when I interviewed him.
Absolutely. Kevin is 100% correct. And there are some wonderful bridges. Now, make no mistake, there are parts of African culture that are completely at odds with the Christian faith, and Christians just cannot accommodate some of that stuff. And there definitely aspects of it, but there's actually a surprising number of things about African culture that actually is commensurate with the Christian faith.
Are there any works that you would recommend as far as like digging into that? Or?
Well, I think that in terms of works that I could recommend, I can recommend on the issue of the African church and how Africa shaped the Christian mind. I mean,
Thomas Oden.
Thomas Oden's book is
Yeah, I
just
got that book.
wonderful. Yeah, it's really, really wonderful. I just recently got some stuff from John and Beatty, who I'm planning on reading as well, in my list now. It's
Yeah, I
just that
have some old books of his. He's
my
not living anymore, is he, John?
no, I think he
Okay.
passed away, but he's got some good. But there are other, and there are a growing number of younger people coming up who are also scholars who are publishing stuff now. I've got people doing book on African Christian ethics and these kinds of things. I forget the name of that the scholar. I've got the book in the lounge there. But no, I do think that there are some good works out there that are worth reading. I said to Dr. Mugabe, I said I would like to have his papers and try and get his book, which I think Baylor published as well. I'd like to read that.
Okay.
Cool. I think that there are, and I think it's actually a work that the African church needs to do. I actually said to Dr. Kiyama, I said to them, how can the African church restore to public discourse in Africa the rich history that Christianity has in Africa, where the church was led by African people in all its richness and diversity and made massive contributions to the Christian worldview and the history of the church. And I think it's important for Christians to understand this thing wherever they are in the world. The same cannot be said for North America and South America. But Christians in North America and South America should know it was the African church and church leaders who were instrumental in the shaping and formulation of many of the early Christian doctrines to do with the deity of Christ and the Holy Spirit.
So true. Yeah.
So, that's just church history. But we don't teach enough church history in the churches, in my estimation. And then, of course, we become victims to the sloganeering and the one-liners of our contemporary society.
Yeah, so true. Cool. Yeah. Here's another comment. Crazy how Marxist ideology can rob you of identity.
Yeah,
anything to say?
Yeah, well, if you're a collectivist, there goes your identity.
That's
You've got to
true.
be
You're
part of the
part of the
herd.
group, the hegemony.
That's right. That's what's going to go. And this is what a lot of the people are squabbling all about now at the moment. Is this notion of the identity and the individual. This is what I'm learning this stuff in philosophy as well. That, as I understand, Marxism was really a reaction to kind of liberalism, and there's this clash of values between these different views of the individual and the individual in relationship to other individuals. And it's interesting stuff. My challenge is I also have 5 children.
Yeah, that's true.
And I work in a university, which means I have more than 5 children, because a lot of the students I work with sometimes behave like children. And so I got to do all of that and then try and read as broad, university, because I get students coming in from all kinds of backgrounds with all kinds of questions. It'll be the garden science debate. It'll be church history. It'll be theological discussions on the nature of Jesus and salvation and the church and miracles. It'll be on ethical issues, you name them, right across the board. I mean, it's just, so it's difficult to be reading all that stuff to the extent that you want to and be equipped to trying to help people along. But you kind of just got to plow on. You got to kind of just do. Well, you just got to trust that the Lord is going to be with you in this process, and a safe way to protect yourself is to just keep reminding yourself to do everything in love, because love just covers up a whole bunch of own inadequacies and just failings. And if you can love people and be gracious towards them, and but also speak the truth, man, you can do a lot. But you're going to have to also nowadays, I think, if you want to engage, you got to start doing some homework. You're going to have to start trying to understand the ideas that people are gripped by, at least at some level, to be able to ask a meaningful question. I'm not suggesting everybody go out there and get a philosophy degree, but we have to start loving God with both our hearts and our minds. We have to do this, and it's true in Europe, it's true in America, it's true in Africa as well.
Yeah, so very, very true. Yep. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I guess we went a little bit over, but that's fine because
Hey,
you're in Africa. There's no
we're on
such thing,
African
right?
time, yeah.
It's all good. And you know me, I'm
Yes.
Latino, so whatever. But yeah, it's been awesome having you, Simon, and thank you so much, Matt and Richard, for
No.
tuning in, and all those who are watching later on. I hope this has been a blessing to you, and I know Simon will be back on someday soon, hopefully.
Yes.
Maybe Nell as
Yes.
well. I'd love to have her.
For sure. Yes. Yes.
So
No, we'd love to.
before we wrap it up, maybe can you share how can people be in touch with you, and also what's the name of your YouTube channel?
We got, okay, just to start with, we have a Rasha Christi South Africa YouTube channel where you can go and subscribe. And with our new online program, we recently ballooned to over 500 subscribers. So
Oh yeah, I saw
please
that.
do support us on that regard. We have a South African Rasha Christi website, rashachristi.co.za, where we have articles coming out on a regular basis, and also free ebooks that you can download from there as well. So do avail yourself of that. And whilst Matt Graham is maybe still listening, but Matt, I need to track you down because we need some articles for our website from you. So I'm going to hunt you down and get some articles out of you.
Yes, and I still want to interview you, Matt.
Yes.
We're going to do a talk on feminism, maybe.
Yes, I was interviewing Mark Allen the other day, and he's
cool.
a good friend.
I like Mark.
Art and so anyway, that's one way you can check us and follow what we're doing, and please pray for us and support us. We've got 5 Rasha Christi chapters at the University of Pretoria, Stellenbosch, University of KwaZulu-Natal, Northwest University, and Rhodes University. There's a lot more universities in South Africa and schools where we want to be established, so we must pray for that to grow, but also to see RC expand to the north, into countries to the north of us. I'd love to see that.
That would be Mozambique and Zimbabwe,
Botswana, and Namibia.
Botswana. Oh yeah, okay.
All the countries. There's universities in every Africa, Zambia, and all these countries. There's there's universities in all of these countries. We've got interest in Burundi. I went to Burundi actually a few years ago, and
what do they speak there? French? Are they a French country? No.
Yeah, they speak a few languages there as well, like they do in most African countries. There's usually like a European language. It's either French or it's Portuguese.
Yeah. South Africa has the most, right? Has the most national languages. Don't you guys have like 12 national languages or something?
Yeah, 11 official languages, but we're not the most. I mean, there's countries that in Africa where the dialects and that are, but they tend to have like one main language that the Africans speak, and then maybe one or other two, and then they have, I mean, Africans just, the linguistic richness of Africa is just mind-boggling. Anyway, so they could follow us, pray for us. If you want to get our information, you go to our website and you'll see for each chapter we have an email address. We have, Nell and I produce newsletter that comes out every couple of months. We're about to launch another one now. It's been a long time since we got one out because the year has been a bit crazy and mad, and we don't want to bore people with telling them, about what COVID was like, when basically we're sitting down like everybody else, doing things on digital platforms, building websites, and doing what you can via when everybody is bombing everybody with digital platform stuff.
Yeah, that's how I started this channel. Yeah.
Yeah. So but you've got to kind of do what you make the best of it where you are. But so we get a newsletter out every couple of months to tell us about. But we've got a number of people following us on WhatsApp as well. And then people who abandoned WhatsApp, a whole crowd on Signal, and then people who abandoned everything and they just email us as well, and people who are tired of it and have gone to other platforms. So we try and keep up as best we can. But we would love to keep in touch with people. Please pray for us. If God leads you to support Rasha Christi South Africa, we've got space to receive general funds, donations. We always, as a campus ministry, we're always in need of some funding to be able to put on events. quality events to attract the best Christian scholars we can, to equip and train Christians to make an influence and engage. So we're looking to do that. And also, if you want to support individual teams, we've got myself and Nell, who kind of have a lot of our support from the US, although we've got some support in the UK now, and also some folks here locally who are supporting us, for which we're very grateful. But also, just if God leads you to do that, we'd be grateful for that consideration as well. It's been tough with COVID. I know that especially for those of us who raise support, because a lot of people have lost their jobs here in South Africa. COVID pandemic has been a train wreck on a large proportion of people in the country, because a large proportion of the country's economy is tied to tourism. And huge amount, billions and billions and billions of rands are tied into, and the tourism industry has just died. I mean, to give you an example, we went to the Kruger National Park last year. We were in a part of the Kruger National Park. We went into one of the main parks where if you go there, there's always people there. There's always a crowd. We were the only people in the restaurant.
Wow.
The only people. There was nobody else there. It was amazing because the animals are everywhere because there's no traffic. But there was just nobody there, which is wonderful if you're wanting to see animals, but it's not good for the country.
Yeah, and then the riots. I mean, that also affected you all, I'm sure, because it's been bad, right? The last few weeks.
Well, not so much where we are, the area where we are now.
Or Durban.
But I've got lots of friends and family in the east. This was kind of in KwaZulu-Natal predominantly, where it was really, really bad. Because it was tied into Jacob Zuma, who's the former president, and he's from Zululand, and that is Zululand. So there's a political connection there, but it's complicated. But yeah, it's difficult because that doesn't also bode well for the country and sending messages to the global world that we're burning one of our provinces to the ground. It had an impact across the country. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine was looking to buy a chainsaw the other day, and they wanted some advice on chainsaws. And I like playing with chainsaws. And so she said, could you come with me and show me how to buy these things, because we need one on the farm we're on. We've got some trees that need to be tended to. So I went over there, but you can't get Stihl chainsaws because it's a big brand. But the major shop that kind of distributes Stihl chainsaws, which are either assembled in Brazil or Germany, goes through Pietermaritzburg, as I understand. And the guy says we can't get those chainsaws, and it's going to be months before. So here locally, you see what happens with these things, something of this scale cascades through society now, and something as simple as going to your local, place to buy equipment. There's no chainsaws there. So, and they said it's going to be months because they burnt the factory to the ground. Yeah.
Wow. I'm glad you guys have been safe, Potchefstroom. Continue to pray for South Africa and all the violence. Yeah, cease too.
Yeah. But here's a request for all who listen to you.
Okay.
Pray most for this. Pray for salvation. There are many things to pray for, but the thing we should be praying for more than anything else in Africa is salvation, and that Jesus would just come here and conquer hearts and minds. Because there's just so many things going on in Africa, and we need to be prepared, but we just need the grace and the mercy of God and His favor. We need His favor so badly in all things, in our politics, in our economics, in our getting over here in South Africa, our post-apartheid condition, and there's just so many issues, and so we just really need people to pray for us, and we need workers. I'll be very frank with you. I'll say to anybody out there who listens to this, if you want to come out here and work with us in South Africa and serve, just email me. We love to receive people. We've got a great network and community of people doing all kinds of things. And there is no shortage of places for people to serve and help here. We've got a number of missionaries from the US here in Potch who basically are based here full time.
Are a lot of them there right now, or did they leave during COVID?
Well, one of them is actually part of a member of our church. Scott, he's going to be arriving next week now. So of course, there's been the whole COVID thing. Some of them were stuck here. They were here for most of the time, and then they kind of go out, and then there was a third wave, and then you have your different waves hitting different countries, and then countries change their policies, and then the vaccine came in, and now we've got that. So I don't know where this is all going, but at the moment, some of the guys came, and we've had one of our supporters, Eric, came to visit us recently, but there are protocols now. I'm not sure what the latest is, South Africa, US travel, but you can find out. And if you want to come and join in the work here, there is plenty of work for anybody who can serve. There's work. There is so much work to be done here, and I would encourage everybody to do that. South Africa is an amazing country with amazing people. Yes, we've got some amazing problems, but most people have got problems, and it's a place where God is working, and it can really impact you. If you're a Christian out there this evening and you are in a bit of a slump, and you kind of don't feel like God is in your life, if you need to be aroused from your slumbers, come to Africa. Africa will arouse you from your spiritual slumbers. Make no mistake about that. You find the right Christians. We can show you things here. It's truly amazing to see what God is doing, and that's what has been so fulfilling for all the challenges Nell and I have had. Is we've come to this town here, and we have seen God do some work here, and it's pretty amazing, and it's such a privilege to be a part of that work. And so I wish that more Christians would come and see that. And so if that's you, if you're feeling jaded and down, come and talk to Simon and Nell, and we shall plug you in.
Like I said, God loves you, and Simon has a plan for your life.
Exactly. God loves you, and Simon Brace has got a wonderful plan for your life.
There you go. Awesome. That's a good way to close, I guess. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks everyone for tuning in, watching this later on, and praying for Simon and the ministry there. And of course, they're having their symposium. So if you want to catch some awesome lives, I believe it's next weekend. Let's see I don't even know what day it is.
No.
It's coming
all of next week, Monday through Thursday next week. And it's our time from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the evening, which is 12 and 2 o'clock EST in America, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So do join us. We've got some great speakers. Paul Copan. We've got some scholars from the Discovery Institute. Nora Hale speaking as well. Kristen Davis. We've got a really first-class lineup of speakers on all kinds of interesting topics that are also topics that everybody else is dealing with as well.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks again, Simon. I guess I'll let you go. It's probably your bedtime there.
Thank you. Thank you. And you need to come and visit us as well.
Right. Yes.
You're very special to Nell and I. We miss you very much. And
all right.
We'd love
Send
to
my
see
love
you
to them.
We will do.
All right. Take care.
God bless.
All right. Bye. See y'all.
Bye-bye.